afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're listening to this podcast. And if you're like me and driving while listening to a podcast, please drive safely. I don't want my voice to be the last thing you hear. um, so I'm here today with my co-host Fatima Noor. How are you, Fatima?
Good. I hope everyone's doing well.
And we have Mohammed Amin here. Per usual, you can hear him, but if you're watching on YouTube, you cannot see him. Hi, Mohammed.
Hey everyone.
And we have Hussein in the background. He's going to be listening today. Hey, Hussein.
Hello, everyone.
You might know him as one of our board members. How have you been, Fatima?
Doing good. Doing great. I
Yeah.
missed the podcast, honestly. I missed
Yeah.
recording.
Aw, missed you too. Also, big news. Congratulations.
Oh,
You're a
thank you.
graduate.
Thank you.
You too, Mohammed. You too, Hussein.
Thank you from the back.
Thank you.
How does it feel to be out of school?
Knowing I'm going back, it's like on the back of my head. I have
Yeah.
to go back, so it's continuous, but
Yeah.
I am so excited for what's next.
How about you, boys?
I guess a lot of spare time and free time, so that's nice.
I'm going back in the fall, so I don't think
Same.
anything's gonna change.
Yeah. Just back to the struggle. It's okay.
Yep.
Okay. So with today's episode, we have two amazing guests that am very happy to introduce. So first off, AnNisa Abdi and Sarah Greaney. Am I saying your last name right?
Yeah, grainy.
Grainey. I am so sorry.
Don't worry about it. It's okay.
My pronunciation is always wrong. Like,
No
but
worries.
thank you for correcting me. So I wanted you guys to introduce yourselves. How are you guys doing? How is everything going?
Yeah, I'm doing really, really well. I feel super excited to be here because I love podcasts. And, I've only been on the other side where you're listening and enjoying it. And when you asked me, I remember telling you, oh, no, I'm so nervous. But I'm so glad to be here. Yeah, I'm doing really well. And I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Me too. I'm glad to have you here.
Yeah, welcome. So my name is Sarah Greaney, and I'm actually very excited. This is my first ever podcast, so I feel like I'm stepping into, super technology world. This is great. And my students will be beyond thrilled. They'll be excited. So the last time I was in the WMPG studio was over 15 years ago, and I did a segment with Roy Gim, and I was a volunteer coordinator for the Obama for America campaign in 2008. So it's kind of neat to be back here. So thanks for this opportunity to be of service. This is great.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to talk to you both. So usually before we start, I like to do like a icebreaker just to make everybody comfortable. So I have a question. If you were a trivia night, like if you were at a trivia night, what category or like what subject do you think you'd like know the most about?
So we do where I work at a public school system, and we have a Jeopardy day every Thursday as just like a starter in the morning or in the afternoon, just to break things apart and just have some fun. And even though we do this every Thursday, I'm totally blanking on what the categories are. So I
Or
would
any
say
subject?
any subject. I would say podcasting. If
Podcasting?
that was a subject, I'd totally be into it.
Ooh. What's your favorite kind of podcast?
Yeah, so I'm kind of indiscriminate. I love all different types of podcasts, but I do love finding different series or established programs that, like, I'm like, wow, I'm like listening to it, and it's like, goes back to 2015 and beyond. And so, yeah, but currently I am really into On Being with Krista Tippett, and that's a really, really, thoughtful and reflective podcast. And yeah, that's kind of in the space I've been in.
Love that.
Nice. Okay, so if it was a trivia night, oddly enough, probably movie trivia. I have a very interesting multimedia brain. I make a lot of connections, and my students like that. Probably also like musical trivia. I know a lot of random information because my parents are from an older generation, so I grew up listening to a lot of different music. And then, of course, my students continue to introduce me to amazing artists. So probably that. And then gymnastics, because I was a gymnast for many, many years. And that's what kind of was an obsession for a long time. And for podcasts, I'm embarrassed to say I've only ever listened to a handful of them. But I'm looking forward to doing more of that now that I'm no longer in graduate school. So there's more time. So I can relate to what you all are going through.
What's your favorite musical?
My favorite musical was the one I saw when I was in high school, and it's Phantom of the Opera.
Ooh.
Yes, by Andrew Lloyd Webber. But there's other ones. This probably the second in line would be Rent, which is a wonderful musical.
I have seen Ren.
Yeah.
How about you, Fatima?
I always blank on trivia questions. I think it's like you have to go really fast. But I would say history. I like reading a lot about history. I want to say I would be good at history trivia. And the podcast I listen to, a lot of true crime. I'm a true crime podcaster.
I was about to say the same
Yeah.
thing. I love true crime. I listen to Stephanie Sue, and
She's amazing.
yeah, she's a really good true crime podcaster. And I'll just like watch different like YouTube videos of people like being interrogated, which probably is weird, but
No, actually, I confess I do the same.
so that's probably also the category I'd be. If that's a trivia category, true crime, like murders. But also Harry Potter. I'm a big Harry Potter fan, and if any questions I can answer, I would win. Well, thank you guys for your answers. So tell me a little about yourselves, your background. What do you guys do?
I'll start.
Yes.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, it's very hard to put into words what we are as people. I think I can describe what I do professionally. I can describe what I try to achieve in my personal life as a human being. But I think overall, I am a person who is committed to uplifting my community. I think that, especially through my own experiences of hardship. So what I do, a lot of the work I do is advocacy. A lot of the work that I do is educational related. And I really love that. I think I often reflect on how if you can't seem to understand an issue, or being in the world, in a world that we live in today where everyone kind of is decisive on a lot of major topics and a lot of major things about our lives, if you work with children, the reconciliation between what you think is acceptable or how you're taught to be, it's such a shift. And I've been enjoying that space in my life where I am receiving a re-education while I'm in the education field working with kids, because it's definitely has been, that's what I like to do for fun, is learn from students. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you. It's really hard to encapsulate yourself like that. So, first of all, I guess I am a woman. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am an immigrant, but I came here to this country when I was just a little baby, una niña. So my sister and I are adopted from Bogota, Colombia. Our parents brought us there in 1978. And of course, back then, Colombia was going through a lot of its own political problems and a lot of turmoil. And so coming off of that situation, our birth mother did abandon us. And so it's a bittersweet situation because we were adopted by two loving parents and raised here in New England. And so to flash forward, I am a teacher at Lewiston High School. So I've been teaching, this is my second year. I'm both certified to teach English and now English as a second language, so working with multilingual students as well. And I'm also a woman in long-term recovery from substance use disorder, and something I'm very proud of. And so a lot of the work that I do is, I haven't done a whole lot of advocacy work around some of the issues that my students are facing, but I do things like I'm very visible. So I chaperone prom, and I dress as a proud member of the LGBTQ plus community. And that's something that, for me, I've made a lot of strides. It is difficult sometimes to step out of your comfort zone, but when you work with young people, the more I can express myself, first and foremost as a human being, but also as a young woman of color, and a person who's embracing a lot of change in my own personal life. I think it's a great way to be a role model for our young people. So Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for being so open about your experiences. I really appreciate that you're being vulnerable. So, you both work in this like school system, but what got you here? Like, why did you choose working in the school system? Like what? Because like everybody chooses a route in their life, you know. So, what was your motivation to work in the school?
I can start again
go ahead,
first, if that's okay. So when I went to UNH, I went to the University of New Hampshire. Yeah. And initially I thought, I want to be like a zoologist or a marine biologist. So I started in biology, and then just things started to shift, and I recognized that my greatest passions were with literature but also language. And so I decided to change majors, and I decided to become an educator. I love teaching other people things, and I love learning. And at that time, also, I was still dealing with a lot of personal self-esteem issues, but I decided to go that route. And then I got into education. I got certified in the state of New Hampshire and was going through some pretty significant personal challenges at that time with substance use disorder. And so I completed 1 year of teaching and then resigned from that position, and then had to kind of figure things out, and was walking through some difficult periods in my life. But I knew when, things got brighter for me and I chose a different path in life, that I wanted to get back into education. So I found a job in Lewiston Public Schools, first as a substitute teacher. And then I decided, when they created the RISE program at Lewiston Public Schools in the high school, it was for working with children living with autism and intellectual disabilities. So that's where the journey started. And then it took the support of some really encouraging people and staff and friends that said, have you looked at your transcripts? Why aren't you a teacher? And so I'm really, really just grateful that I've kind of come full circle in that journey. So that's how it came to be.
Yeah, my journey was a little bit roundabout. I had worked in Lewiston, Auburn for about a decade doing advocacy work of all kinds, working with women and children, working with public health in that section of our community. And really and honestly, my first professional job was in the social services. So kind of really stayed the trajectory. I was also, my name, AnNisa, is a kind of a precursor to what I do in my life. It's a chapter in our holy book, and the Quran. It is the fourth largest, and it specifically talks about the women, the children, and the vulnerable. And so that's a pathway that's always spoken to me. I'm a person who, I was born in Russia. I grew up in Thailand. I experienced a lot of, journeys myself. And I've been supported by the universe in the form of human beings. And so, therefore, to me, it was both a natural pathway, but also I was similarly, I had started my recovery process a few years earlier, and was really kind of looking to pivot and see where else I can bring my voice to, and see where else I can speak about the experiences that I've had. And I was able to connect with a wonderful program in my district that is doing work and education in a very unique way. And it kind of came together. And I never imagined myself working in a public school system. I think a lot of my trauma came from the public school system. And so, but it's also not ironic to me, and at least not lost on me, that it's where I certainly feel like I went back home to grow, and it's a lot of my growth has been happening in this process as much as it is as I watch my students, graduate and accomplish different things. It's definitely not lost on me that as I embarked on the latter end of establishing my recovery process, and also that I came back home to grow up. And Longley, in where I work, is where it was the first primary school I went to. Wow. Yes. So I did not receive a primary education. I was born, as I mentioned, in Moscow in 1992, which was when the dissolution was occurring between the Soviet Union and the federation that it is today. And so my family kind of left, and from there we were separated, as a lot of refugees and immigrants experience. My father came to the United States. My mom and I were in Thailand. And so I spent 5 years of my life growing up there. And public education, and that's not something that's affordable or available everywhere else. Like there are many ways of being, and in other societies, education and primary education isn't accessible to the public unless you can afford it or have means to hire private educators. And so I did not go to primary school, and I came to the United States. I lived in Chicago for about a year, and really my education started on the campus that I'm currently working on. And so it is both a homecoming, and it is also a space where I intend to do a lot of justice.
Definitely full circle.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that. So I had a question regarding like school system as a whole. How do you think it's changed from when you guys were in school, first coming? I know you guys both migrated here, so it was probably harder, like being in a space where like you were the only person of color. Do you think things have changed now, but also leaning into like the substance use disorder field? When it comes to like youth that are using or youth that are struggling, do you think that they're getting more resources now or than before, or do you think it's kind of the same?
Do you mind if I go first?
Not at all.
Yeah. So for me, it was definitely like not because I not only came to the United States and came to the school, I'd never been in a primary education system before. I'd never like left my house and was away from my parents for hours and was around that many peers and in a controlled setting learning. In a space that didn't necessarily meet my needs too, because that's the other part that we don't talk about when we talk about education is we send kids to schools, whether it works for them or not, they're in those spaces for that allotted time, and it can be traumatic if it's not meeting your needs. And so, yeah, I was not used to, I remember, and I reference this to my students a lot, just as like we get to know each other and, tell each other stories, that the experience of like, when your mom drops you off to pre-K and you're crying and you don't want to go into class, that was happening for me 5th through 6th grade. And my, I'm pretty sure my peers were looking around like, you're still crying because your mom is leaving. But yeah, so a lot of those experiences for me were happening for the first time. And so it was traumatic at that age to experience that level of separation, to come from the trauma that I had already come from. It was a lot. And also culturally, things were very different when I first came to Maine and came to the public school systems. We were, at that time, an all-American high school. We were a community that was predominantly white. So I remember in my 5th grade or my 6th grade class, we do like any school, right? We have health concerns and things like that. But I remember our teachers doing lice checks and requiring me to take my hijab off and not having any kind of like space for Muslim kids or kind of, for discretion or privacy or any kind of thing like that, or even just like autonomy, like not knowing that my hijab could just come off at any time by an adult in my, in my new culture. And that was like, when I think about it, I wasn't a particularly religious child, but that loss of autonomy and not understanding what that meant, that exchange and how that goes and how adults decide things and why they wouldn't think to provide me a space that was culturally, knowing of my needs. So yeah, so all around, it was a huge experience for me for the first time, and I reflect on a lot of that experience when I talk to my students now. And one of the pieces that you mentioned about was mental health in public education, and it was traumatic for me as a young person, and it continues to be traumatic for young kids of color, LGBTQ, anyone who generally isn't fitting in the mold of what school used to be. That it is a struggle, and there is a connection between how my students feel and where they're going to receive education. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So for me, being raised in Massachusetts, the primary school I went to, I had wonderful teachers. It was amazing. It was a predominantly white, upper middle class community. I never wanted for anything. I had all the resources I did need, but it definitely was not as diverse as Lewiston. It was back then a small town called Westford, and Westford has grown exponentially. I haven't been back in years, but it would be interesting to kind of see what the demographic is like there now. I'm sure that it's changed quite a bit. When I went to high school, I went to a place called Pinkerton Academy in Derry, New Hampshire, and it was diverse. We had students coming to us from Lawrence, Massachusetts, so we had contingent from Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. We also had African American students, we had Asian students, but again, it was predominantly white students. So, but again, I saw the first emergence of, a diversity club at that high school, which I did join, and it was nice. And I remember my Spanish teacher, Senorita St. Laurent, I think was her name, and she was just a sweet person. And I would talk to these teachers a lot about, my experiences growing up. And but at that time, I'm going to say how old I am, but in the 90s, so when I came to Lewiston to work in the public schools here, I thought, wow, what a big shift. By the time I came here, it was like, wow. But I do think that our students are very appreciative of when we talk more about inclusion and diversity and equity. One of the things that I did earlier in the year was I showed an image to my students that depicts a difference between equality and equity. And it was just really, really eye-opening for them. And I think they appreciated that because I always tell them I'm a visual learner. So I'm trying to really be a person that's going to get a little more have courageous conversations, which is one of the reasons I'm really grateful that you invited me today. To be a young educator in Lewiston I'm learning so much very quickly. And I want to be able to take some steps forward. We've already done some really great work at Lewiston High School in terms of creating some more safe spaces for all of our youth. Yes. And I continually remind my students we are human beings first, but we also have to be proud of who we are. So I would say we have made some strides, but we still have a long way to go.
Yes.
So you both mentioned changes and shifts within the school system, whether it was coming from being students to being now educators or working in the system. So my question is, how do you think you adapted to the changes within the system, and how did you adapt from being in the system to working in the system?
For me, it was, it was a culture shock. I had worked, in organizations for a while at this point, and the public school system and the public education system is a beast unlike any other I've seen. It's very interesting. It's an institution that's been around for, very, very long time, but it's not an institution that's constantly being updated or really, and I think it's a very interesting time to do education right now, especially post-COVID. It's uncharted territory for me, not only as a person who's new to the work of education, but also really the times that we're in. So for me, a lot of the changes that a lot of the things that I come across that were very like a shock to my system. The amount of racism that can be embedded in institutions, the amount of, there was a lot for me. And coming from my own traumatic, past with public education and working in the same system that I had graduated out of. But I also had this very unique opportunity working in an organization where we are decentralized power system. We are student voice led. And so it's both a system where I'm navigating things that are outdated, things that don't serve our students and probably didn't serve the institution for a long time. And at this very same time, we're recreating this whole world of what education can be like. So existing in the in-between naturally can be, you can come up with, there's a lot of things to come up against, but it's also a space for a lot of creativity.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. So for me, I spent the first 6 years of my career working at Lewiston High School as a BHP, as an ed tech for the RISE program. And one of the most important things about that work was that I literally was in just about every classroom in that high school because I was a one-to-one support. So what that gave me was sort of an inside view into a lot of different teaching styles, a lot of different learning environments, and also sometimes really precious conversations with students. And sometimes, for most of the time, they were really positive, and sometimes I'd get insight to where a student might not be so comfortable or is feeling like they're not being heard, or if they have concerns, they don't necessarily know where to bring them. And that wasn't always the case, but I think that having that experience prior to becoming a teacher was really helpful. And so now, having been a teacher, the first 2 years, the first year was extremely steep learning curve for me. I am now just about to complete my second year of teaching, and I have been a roving teacher. So I push my little cart, which I very proudly display my Colombian flag on it, as just so people know it's Miss G coming. But it's a very interesting experience, and you get to talk to so many different educators and so many different students. And for me, it's finding the balance between hearing, I don't want to use the word negativity, but the room for growth.
Yeah.
Because I do have students that can be agitated or upset, or things that happen. And what I constantly remind them is that, we want to find a way to, raise our voices in, respectfully, but to make sure that we're advocating for ourselves. And so there's a balance between, when you're an educator, between making sure that you find a way to harness student voice, but to do it in such a way that you're also teaching them how to be pragmatic and how to express those things. Because I have students that have all kinds of opinions, and because they are still developing their lovely teenage minds, I'm trying to help them find ways to do that with, integrity and character. And some days it goes really well, and other days it's, but my students are teaching me so much. So I think for me, I feel like I'm really privileged. I have an opportunity to continue to grow and to show my students how they can use their voices, and to do it in such a way that, we say there's a lot more work to be done here. So, yeah.
I love that. Especially when you said making sure that students have their voice and are in charge, because I think growing up there was that whole the teachers, right? Because it's they're older and and it's that power struggle where it's hard because you can't voice oh, I need help, with you and the hijab, having them take it off. You can't. You didn't know how to be
that feels unsafe to me what you're doing.
Yeah, because it's oh, they're older, they know what's right.
Exactly.
And it's so. Teachers definitely have a lot of power when it comes to students, because the student has to trust you so much. So it's more so finding a way to teach them to have their own voice and be able to speak up and say this is wrong.
Yeah, and actually, as you say that now, I think I had an insight, and because when I was talking about the hijab experience, I prefaced it with, and I wasn't a religious person, and I'm a deeply spiritual person, deeply religious person now, but I think that's because I made the identity connection between that's all for my faith, but that was actually my identity, just who I am as a person was being violated in that moment. And I think to just survive that, even then I minimized it to, oh, this is just my religion and I'm not that religious, but it totally had an impact on me because it's such a vivid memory.
Yes.
Wow. It's interesting. And, it brings back a memory I had from when I was really little. So being adopted, my mom is about 5'9", beautiful lady, and she's blonde. And there was this little one who came up, I think it was morning or afternoon kindergarten, I don't remember. And this little one came up and said to my mom and said, well, you can't be her mommy. And my mom said, well, why can't I be her mommy? And they said, well, she doesn't look like you. And it's just very interesting, because my mom is my mom. And I love her with all my heart. But I think it was the first time that I ever experienced the racial or cultural divide. And but I like I said, I have a loving family, and I had a lot of lessons to learn as I grew up. And today, identity is very important. And I am very proud to be an American citizen, but I'm also very proud of my Colombian heritage as well. And my parents were very, very honest with us from as young as we were, the earliest we could understand that we were adopted into a loving family, but they shared with us, the story. So I think you're right. It has everything to do to tie back to our identity and our heritage and everything that we hold dear. And if I could add one other thing, because you mentioned the word creativity.
Yes.
So, and maybe this is something I should share a little later more on, but recently coming into finishing a little project with my students that I'm taking on from a previous teacher who worked at Lewiston High School. Her name's Deanna Earhart, and she's now one of the dean of students at Lewiston Middle School. And the project is called I Wish My Teacher Knew. And it will be featured on the walls of the Lewiston Public Library this summer in July 2023. But it offers students an opportunity to express their voice. And I always tell them is that you can say as much or as little as you want. And I remember the first time I worked on this project with her, we co-created it because she wanted to do this as a result of the pandemic and how students were feeling voiceless at that time. But like I said, I don't want to take up too much time on that. So, and I remember just how moved I was by the submissions that came in that year. And then to see this again from my students who are in the courses that I teach, English language development, as part of an agreement that we are in with the Department of Justice. And so it's incredible. I mean, I just literally have been moved to tears by these submissions that are coming in. And I think I'll save some of that for later, but it has been a great opportunity to have them express their creativity. And some of them are being very vulnerable. And it's a privilege.
Yeah.
It's truly a privilege.
And I'm actually so glad you brought that up because one of my, I absolutely have seen the series in downtown Lewiston Public Library. I'm a walker, a podcast listener and a walker in the morning. And honestly, it was during COVID, right after COVID or in between. And I remember going on my morning walks and truly being moved by the images that our students were sharing and the stories that they were sharing. And some of them were just as small as, I have these cats and this is my favorite person, or, this is my favorite relationship is with my pet. And even though, the story, it's just, when you see it, you can't help but know what it is. It's a witnessing act. It's really, it's being witnessed in a way that perhaps those who know us intimately, because of the isolation, because of the divide, because of whatever, right, don't get to see, or we're not that delicately put together as like this one piece of beautiful piece about me. I come as a wholly coalesced person. It's this, it's that, it's all of this. But in those moments, it's a snapshot. And honestly, I'd be on these walks in the morning and I'd be so moved by these snapshots of stories of kids in our community. And it's a very, very beautiful thing to have. Yeah.
Good. I'm so glad that you saw it too. Did you catch any of that back then?
No.
It's
No.
gorgeous. Yeah.
So I'm really, really thrilled, and I was beyond honored when Deanna asked me to take this project on because it was originally done out of her digital media class. And when she asked me to take it on, I think at first it's always that little bit of fear, like, can I do this? Can I make this happen? But really, it's not about me. It's about them. And they've really just risen to the occasion, and I can't wait for them to see and to feel like they're being witnessed, and like whatever that ends up looking like for them. And so stay tuned for more on that.
Yes, I'm definitely looking forward to it. It sounds amazing. I wish I saw it.
It really, to me, I am so looking forward to the next installment. But it gave it gave us permission to put our intimacy on display, right? Like those images were sometimes, and I was a new pet owner at the start of COVID. Yes, some of us had babies, some of us got cats and dogs, and I got myself a beautiful cat, and then later another cat. And as growing up as a person and we'll get to the different ways that trauma and, things like that impact us, I grew up very separated from the world of animals and pets, and so never had the depth of that relationship revealed to me. Look at me getting emotional just talking about my baby cats. But watching and reading those little snapshots, it gave me permission to put my own intimate love of my own deep relationships with my cats. And honestly, I am a cat lady. My students call me that. My staff and I joke about that. But it is so seeing that on display just to me to this day lives with me as like, wow, that's permission to share our intimate lives. Yeah.
And I remember, and that's another thing, if I can just sort of speak a little freely about, as an educator, there are certain things that I'm required to do. Obviously, I need to meet the needs of my students and follow the curriculum, and that's important. But I remember when I kind of, went to my, the higher ups and just sort of checking in and making sure that, is it all right if I do this? And, and they said, that's fine. And I don't know why I had some trepidation about it at first, and as soon as we started getting into this, some students are a little more hesitant, like some of my young men, they're okay.
Oh yeah.
But of course, I told them, so there is a, English grammar standard. There's 2 language standards tied to this. So of course we have to do that work, but it was really neat. And some of the things that I would never have expected to come about came about. And so I think that I never realized that, yes, you mentioned teachers and educators having power, but there's power to kind of give some of that back to the students. And I feel like for the first time I'm able to do that. And they're responding really beautifully. And even if it's only just a little bit of that they share, I think it's great.
It's just, again, like giving them permission, giving ourselves permission to show the intimate parts of our lives that, especially if you're a teenager, could probably either lives in your phone or with your friends. And so it's, yeah.
Okay, so our next question is, what is the hardest part about your job? And it's a very negative question, so we're also going to change it around, vice versa. What is the best part of your job? Yes.
Yeah. My students give me so much permission to be myself in a way that I hope to do for them as an adult. It's just their own, just them being who they are. I mean, we at our school celebrate all identities, and it's evolved, like I said, my own understanding of what an identity can include. And even on topics and subjects in which, like I said, things can get decisive, if you are working with a child, it's not political. It's not political what name to call someone. If you love someone is not political. How to dignify the experiences that they're having is not political when you care about a child who's telling you that what they're experiencing is unfair. And so in so many of those ways, they really enhance me. They enhance my empathy. They give me permission to be myself. And yeah, so in that sense, it's really, really wonderful. On the flip side of that, it's really hard to see, a phoenix rise from the ashes. And a lot of times that's kind of in both because we are in an institution and just because we are humans, and that's the part of their life that they are in right now, that I'm witnessing a lot of struggles, a lot of things that make them not believe in themselves or not believe in the experiences that they're having and the life that they deserve and are destined for. So that's hard to see. It's hard to see also, and speaks to my own past, the lack of examples that we have in a lot of communities about the different lives that are out there that are evident.
Yeah.
Like, people do exist in different ways. There are multiple ways of being in the world, and some of us, myself included, came from a specific community, and I thought that that was the only way to be. And I know my students all come from different communities and different identities and ethnicities and cultures, and so a lot of them are also being held back by this idea that we need to just be one way and we need to do it the way my mom did it or the way your grandma did it. And that sucks to see as a adult that that's still happening in the lives of young people, because honestly, they're looking for pathways that are respectful of who they are becoming. And a lot of times it's, that the pathways that are already established, that are accessible, are asking them to not be who they are. And I just don't want them to have to do the work of being who they are once they're older, because it's an experience that could be facilitated much earlier.
Yes.
Yeah. So boy, this is a tough one. So the hardest part of my job is that sometimes I feel like I don't know how to read my students and what they're going through. So trying to find out ways to, carefully, lovingly, respectfully try to extract from them how they're doing on any given day, because at the heart of it, I can't teach someone if they're not available for learning. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case for all kids every day. Like, we have a lot of great days. Most days are good. But I think one of the hardest parts as an educator is being able to say, okay, where are we at today? And also to give myself permission to understand that things don't have to be perfect, and they will never be perfect. I don't believe in that paradigm anyway. And I think, it's giving myself permission to understand that I can be flexible with what happens. Yes, I have to do a certain curriculum, and yes, it allows me to have some freedom, I'm hoping that next year, as I've learned more about what I can do, and my my coaches and trainers, people that have helped me with this, have given me some great ideas. But I'm also trying to remind myself that it's okay to try new things and be courageous. So that's one of the reasons, for example, I wish my teacher knew is a great example of that. Or, it's, what do they say? It's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. And so one of the things that I tried to do is work in a daily check-in. So there's a particular part of the curriculum that asks students to kind of answer a question. It sits in the realm of working with those language skills and those writing skills. And so what I do is I kind of incorporated a social emotional learning check-in with a daily writing prompt. And so what that does is, for that most difficult part of my job, which is knowing my students are at all different places, and also I teach grades 9 through 12 in the same class, so that can be challenging. And I also teach an English 11 academic, which is, that's a great class, wonderful students in there. But in my English language development class, what I do is I say, take a moment of mindfulness and just rate yourselves. Tell me. And, there may be days when they're like, Miss G, why do you ask us to do this every day? I can just imagine. I just see it in their eyes sometimes. But they do it. We have the mood meter as part of our social emotional learning piece, but I found this little scale. It's a 1 to 10. So if you're at a 0 to a 1, you're like, I am just really struggling today. 5 is like, I'm here, I'm doing all right. And 10 is like, I'm doing great, I'm present, and things are good. And they do it. It's really neat. And so if a student isn't doing their work that day, and I've seen that they put like a 2 on there, well, as I'm sort of just, walking around, taking it really helps me to know that I know where you're at today. I have a little sign on in my cubicle at work that says, my teacher was mad at me for not doing my work, but she never asked me why I wasn't doing my work. And I have that there because I need to be mindful of that. And, obviously I'm going to push my students to do the work and to get it done, because I want them to get these, all this work that will help them to be successful. But at the end of the day, I want them to be heard. I want them to be seen. And so that's why I do that. And I remember one question I asked recently was something about, do you feel you have opportunities to kind of express who you are or talk about some of those things that, because not every student wants to talk about personal stuff, obviously. But one of them said, no, we don't really get a whole lot of opportunity to talk about ourselves, really. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So probably that's one of the most difficult things. And the other one is just seeing things as a teacher that I see differently than when I was a BHP. That I still am fearful of addressing. And I don't mean that I'm afraid that, I don't feel safe necessarily, just it's a process of development and wanting to be, I'm growing myself and how I can develop my voice as an educator and as a young person, and also having my own unique background and experiences, but providing my students a safe place to begin to express themselves. And I think that whether it's something like I wish my teacher knew, or my daily SEL check-in and these writing prompts that allow my students to kind of grow in that way. So
I love that, because I feel like growing up, you don't have a lot of autonomy. You don't have a lot, like I said before, power when it comes to who you are. A lot of these kids don't even fully know who they are. So, and they don't have moments to check in and figure out, okay, why am I feeling this way? Why am I the way that I am? Or a lot of teachers don't ask, why are you acting out today? Oh, someone might have trouble going at home. Parents are going through divorce. Someone just passed away, but they don't have those conversations. It's basically you're going to get a detention, you're going to get a suspension. And that's a struggle for a lot of students. So the work that you're doing, where you're making sure that they're able to check in within themselves, and you're able to see, oh, okay, they're struggling today, that's why they didn't do their work, gives them a lot of power. And it's oh, you're humanizing them. They're not just oh, another kid. And AnNisa, the role, the place that you work, you guys give a lot of the youth autonomy and the way that.
Oh God, it is so scary to give so much power or share power in that way when you are creating a new thing, because you're is that too much, or is this just enough, or am I bugging, or are you bugging? So it's so interesting. But yes, it is. It really is a space that they get to share their voice. We hold daily circles, and this is what I mean, like where you just don't know, and we're like, let's all talk about it. And they're like, that's too much. Like, you know, where they're like, sometimes they'll share, sometimes they won't. It definitely gets a lot of resistance, but it's one of those things that I truly think gets resistance for what it is rather than like what that space could do for them. They're just like, I don't know, that feels uncomfortable, that feels vulnerable, I'm not really into it. But I do think that they take a lot from being in that space, hearing other people, and it is a little practice. In for some of them, the way I posit it is, you know, you're going to be a leader, you're going to be talking to people, you are going to be in a position to have to listen to multiple people's perspective and opinions and what's going on with them. So just cultivating the skill of being in a space, even if, you know, vulnerability is really scary, just hearing somebody else out oftentimes can obviously decrease that discomfort for us, and also allow our students to experience what they cannot yet articulate being spoken about in ways that are being safely held by a community or a tribe. So in that sense, for us, that's one of the ways we push our SEL goals, to be able to socially and emotionally support our students. And one of the other systems that we use, that again, where you don't know if it's, you know, how much of the power or how power is actually facilitating in the space when you're creating it for the first time together, is, you know, we encourage our students, we all have different relationships with different students as it goes, right? Like not every kid is going to bond with you, not every kid is going to open up to you, and having a diverse set of staff and a diverse set of people who can speak to different experiences really helps. So often a student will report to a staff about a difficult experience that they're having. A trusted member of our community will hear something that is going on that can inform us about that student's either behavior or where they're at, and or just how to approach, and we'll share that out on a messaging system that kind of lets all the staff know what's going on. So as they, you know, interact with that kid in the hallway, or you see them not in class, your approach is much more empathetic because you have background information. And so in that sense, again, and why I bring up the power challenge of it, is because we're doing this we're sharing information in a way that supports our students' emotional health, but also we're human beings, so we're sharing their information, and sometimes we're approaching you about things that you did not give us permission to know about you. So it's a delicate balance. It's a very human way of doing life together, because we obviously do we have the same standards. We have to, you know, do all of the technical, logistical things that are required of a space to fulfill the educational needs of our students.
Yes.
But the way that we are being human together and creating community is brand new. And so therefore we're making a lot of mistakes, and we are also making great strides, and in between learning together, like in a real way.
I love that. Well, thank you guys so much. I think definitely what you guys are doing to humanize students and make sure that they have like power over like their own autonomy and power over like everyday, because we had this conversation before where it was like through preschool to like 12th grade, you have your whole day outlined for you, and you're told what to do. You're like, okay, you breakfast, this, and then like you go home, homework, etc. But then like once you hit 18, it's like, okay, figure it out yourself now. You're in charge. And it's great that you guys are making it so like structured in a way that they're able to like figure out what is going on in their mind with their mental health. Figure out, okay, this person's going through something. We're going to make sure that it's structured in a way that works for them. So I definitely want to thank you guys for that.
Thank you.
So I also wanted to commend you both for being so open about your recovery journey. As someone who works with youth who are going through recovery, a lot of them have that fear of the whole stigma and what are other people going to think. So if a youth is struggling and they're trying to go through recovery, what do you want to say about like going through recovery and the whole like community aspect and the fear of people judging you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I live in a community that's predominantly, right, like the community that I particularly belong to is Muslim and is East African and generally from the continent. And so we're varied in culture, in language, in tradition and practice. We've in some way or another been, harmed by colonization and global warming and all of the things that, countries where I'm from go through. And for me, when I was going through recovery or pursuing recovery, I felt a sense of deep shame, almost as though like I was the only person from my community who's had this problem, which I knew not to be true because by proximity and living it with people, you know what is going on. And so, but I felt really, there was no visibility around the matter. And so it's so important to me in my work with youth to say, in particular for those of us who come from unique communities or are living in spaces where there are multiple cultures and you're kind of like jumping the fence between your identities, is that like everything that is, you're in your household, everything that's happening in everyone else's household is happening in your household. It just may be in a different language. Yeah. We are people just as people are. And so it's so important for me to name that for them because it is kind of a almost chasm. Like they know that, that there's substance misuse and abuse in our community. Yet when you leave your home or you leave the spaces where these things are happening, you're denying that these things are real. And in some spaces, you're also having these experiences yourself. So someone somewhere has to just validate the truth of the matter, which is that this is happening. And it's not happening just to you. Yes. It's not happening because of this or because of that. It's the human condition. And we're walking around with human hearts. And so in our households are happening the same things as everybody else's. So it's hard to be visibly, to talk about recovery in my community. You have to do a lot of self-work. You have to have integrated who, your past, your identity, your pain, your trauma, and to be safe. And again, I understand why a lot of people aren't visible in their recovery because it's not a safe space all the time when you come from a judgmental or a community that identifies itself with, its faith. Yeah. No one wants to, it kind of on the face of that say, but I am, Muslim girls need sober spaces too. Muslim girls need education around substance use and misuse. We need to talk very openly about the experiences that drive addiction. Again, those are things that are non-discriminate, where we live, our backgrounds, our level of exposure to trauma, the protective factors we have or don't have, the social determinants of, our health in our society, all of those things. If I'm living in an unhealthy society, then I stand, a chance of getting sick. Yes. Just like when COVID was around, if you didn't take certain precautions, if you didn't address the vulnerabilities that you had, you were liable to get sick. And it would be ridiculous to say that you invented COVID because you had it. And so addiction is similarly in that sense that I didn't invent it. I'm not the Benjamin Franklin of it. And Benjamin Franklin didn't find this place either, as it turns out. So that whole piece is so important to address with people, and that because it takes a lot of brave work to get help, and showing that to people that it's okay and safe to be brave enough to get the help you need. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's important. Yes, so being a woman in long-term recovery is something that I don't share out widely, but I think it is important that I can speak here today about it. And I think one of the most important things at the high school, at Lewiston High School, is that we do have resources available, much more than I would ever remember being available when I was in high school. My issues with substance use disorder did not start until later in my life, and that's just not the case today. There are a lot of young people that are either struggling themselves, and some of it starts with experimentation, and then and things decline from there. Or it may be something, addiction is also seen to be hereditary. So for me, it's not something that I really have I don't use it, my work as an educator as a platform to talk about it. However, I did appreciate the roundtable discussion you did with our students at the high school to talk about these issues. And some of the work that I am doing with my students, just, talking with them, I find out that, as a matter of fact, our students at Lewiston High School are being impacted. All our students, every one of them. I think just about every person I've spoken to in the Lewiston Auburn community have been impacted by addiction in some way, whether that takes the form of one substance or another. Similarly, also mental health issues, things like everything from, you know, anxiety and depression to suicidal ideation. So the good news is that we have in the district taken some great action to bring those resources and help our young people to understand that there are people that they can go to. There are, you know, because not every young person is just going to say readily, I have an issue. And, you know, you just spoke to that, AnNisa, saying that it does take courage to say, I need help with something. And for me, like I said, it's something I'm very careful about, that I do proudly say that I'm a woman in long-term recovery, but I'm very careful about, you know, what I divulge. That's very, very important to me. But I also want young people to know that if they need something, they can come to me and I can be that liaison to the resources that they need. So I would say that that's what I feel is my greatest responsibility, is to always be, you know, present and available for them in that regard. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
So when it comes to getting help, and a lot of youth have this struggle of the impact it's going to make with their family. They're usually thinking about everybody else and how they're going to be impacted, even though they're the ones that are most greatly impacted. How do you think they can go about that? Or how did you go about that, if you're comfortable with me asking that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, there are many pathways to recovery, and I think it's really important that I mention that, because not everybody's journey looked the same in active substance use disorder or issues with mental health. So I would say that it's not a one-size-fits-all type of thing. I think the first and foremost thing is to connect them to someone they feel safe enough to talk to. So at the high school level, it may begin with their guidance counselor, and then we do, like I said, we are fortunate to have a substance use prevention and care coordinator. I apologize if I'm getting the title incorrect. But that person can certainly connect them with other resources. I think in the beginning, it's just knowing that you have someone that is going to honor your confidentiality. I think that's super important for young people. I mean, look at how they don't want to share a lot of things. But then again, as I've learned over the past 2 years, look what happens when I do give them a medium to feel safe, to at least open the door to it. Like if you open the dialogue and create a safe space or place or person for them to connect to, that's going to be a game changer. So I think I don't think I would have ever asked for help if I didn't have some people that weren't coming in a manner of non-judgment. So, and that's the heart, because remember, and as a person who has been connected to others that I love that were the ones struggling, you struggle yourself with your emotions, and you cannot, it's like you kind of forget everything that you learned. So, because I cannot help another person unless they have to want to do it for themselves. And that was the case for me. So the biggest thing that I can do is just be an advocate for them in terms of, there are places you can go. There's at least one safe person you can talk to. Let's start there. But until they are ready to say that and acknowledge that there's an issue, it's tough. And so for young people, and I think there's another element there where peer pressure, other things, pressures to excel at a certain level, whether it's academic or athletic or social emotionally and all those things. So, or even in the family structure. So I think it's just about opening that dialogue and just giving them a safe place to start.
Figuring out how to be brave enough to get the support that you need when you come from a community that is actively afraid of the very thing you're experiencing is hard. I think, one of my favorite pieces of wisdom that I've come to realize and truly accept is that anything that I do that makes me feel safe is not in criticism of anyone else. So if you're not the person I'm coming to talk to and you're the closest person to me, that's not in criticism of you. It's what I need to feel safe. It has to do with my history of relationships. It has to do, 99% of that decision has to do with me. And so So that's really important to name, because I want to encourage young people to not feel pressured to tell whoever is the traditional person that you should be telling this to. If they don't have the emotional skills to have that conversation with you, they should not be shamed for that inability. And we have got to cultivate the ability to have grace, where for our own experience and for the experience of others who just don't understand, who don't have the experiences that you do, or we both don't have the language skills to talk about these things. That's a challenge for a lot of my students, is that they can talk to their family members. They're both speaking different languages, right? English is a language that they're using as an intermediary, but the parent may be speaking one of the native languages. The child may be speaking some of that native language and predominantly another language. And so they can have a conversation on the surface level about what's going on, but then it gets really hard to get to the deeper emotional layer of, what their lives are like and what they're experiencing. And I know that because even as an adult, I have friends and we talk about that hardship of like, I wish I could just articulate this to this person. They would have a greater understanding of me if we had these emotional skills, if we had these language skills, if we have. So there's a lot of reason and there's a lot of barriers not to come out and share, especially again I can only speak to my experience as a Muslim, East African woman, being raised in a very specific culture that is a patriarchal culture that literally women are invisible in. So like to say, like, not only am I not invisible, I'm actively out here having problems and I need help, it can be really daunting. But I really worked hard to establish being witnessed by people who could hold that safety for me, who could allow me to excavate a lot of that pain and grief that I was experiencing. And then I could get myself to a space where I can broaden that conversation to other people in my life. It takes, I know this to be true, in order to have a safe conversation, you have to have a person who's open-minded and empathetic and willing and curious. Yeah. But you also have to be, to a degree, without fear, or your fear has to be in a way, it can't get in the way of the conversation. So it's a two-part. It's both that the other person has to be open, but you also have to do the work around the fear that is holding you back from saying what you have to say. Yes. And so I had to do that work a lot first, of that fear. What was it? What was I afraid of? Like, obviously, generally, you think my parents are going to be so disappointed in me. This is against my culture. This is against my religion, whatever have you. Yeah. But I really had to deconstruct that for myself. Like, what is the worst that can happen? Mm-hmm. What would truly be heartbreaking? What is really heartbreaking? And hold all of those pieces together and honestly, and just kind of do the work of grief therapy, of counseling, of, personal development. Just get brave enough to first be able to see myself, hold myself, appreciate myself, and yeah, I mean, the work of, you'll never be fearless. The work of accepting yourself will be a forever thing. But if you can just accept that part, yes, that this is a forever thing, the work is a forever thing, then you can make strides daily. You can make strides yearly. And so if I couldn't have a conversation year one, and I couldn't have a conversation, by year two would have another goal, by year three, and I would work my way out of the fear to the degree that I am able to have conversations about substance use within my own household, within people that, who could not do that for me, because that itself is a grief you have to grieve, that you, not only when you achieve recovery and are, becoming a healthier person, you have to go back to those unhealthy places with compassion for those same people who are either continuing or trying to, unaware of the way that they're living is creating this and continuing to perpetuate it. And so, so it does take a lot of self-work. Mm-hmm. It does take a lot of self-compassion 100%. And forgiveness. Yeah. And, and I know that because I would have memories of myself in active use that would just shame me to the core. That would make me run out of rooms that nobody even knew what was going on in my mind, right? I would just, a thought would occur to me, a memory would come, and I would be like, I just don't deserve to be here. And so it would just hold me back so much. And like the many dragons that we have to slay in our lives, that shame piece, that what that memory represented, what that image, touched upon, what that conversation, really, what a lot of those things represented, I needed to deconstruct it. Yes. and then change that narrative for myself. And the power, as you're doing that, you're taking it back and you're seeing it, and it empowers you to push forward. Yeah, and honestly, being open, it is also a transcendental experience. Like, talking about what you went through raises you even above it further. And so, yeah, I've never been in a space where my recovery story or my recovery experiences or even my active use wasn't a human experience. I was not the alien I thought I was. I was just a person, and in every way was, validated. Even the unsafe people were not saying I was an alien. They were just saying, I'm uncomfortable with this, and that was not always about me. And it wasn't about my experience, other people's pain and discomfort. So just parsing those things out, separating those things out, knowing who I am, and again, working on my own fear really empowered me to tell my story, to be honest about it, and also to tell others that, like, the sense of adequacy you're looking for comes from doing the thing that you're afraid of doing. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you.
Mhm.
Especially when it comes to fear
Mhm.
from outsider people.
Mhm.
A lot of the fear comes from like
Judgment.
non-education,
Yeah.
judgment, not understanding.
Mhm.
So sometimes, like a lot of need, especially within our community, is education because they don't know. Like a
Mhm.
lot of people don't even understand that substance use disorder is a disease,
Mhm.
and people are struggling. Like they need
Mhm.
help, but
Mhm.
people just don't get that.
Mhm.
Speaking of that, there's a lot of people who do want to get help, but then they end up relapsing,
Mhm.
and it brings them into like a hole, especially youth
Mhm.
who don't have that community around them.
Yeah.
There's that relapse factor. What resources, especially because we have resources within like the Lewiston school system, but we only have one counselor for all the schools. What needs do you think are needed within like the system as a whole to help youth who are struggling or actively using instead of like that suspension? What do you think would be needed to help them?
Yeah. I think for me, the most radical thing, just like allowing all experiences to coexist together.
Mm.
That you're not a different person when you fall out of recovery.
Yeah.
That you're not ambitious anymore. That you're not worthy anymore. Like normalizing that it does, like, recovery takes multiple attempts.
Yes.
Like it's also, honestly, I think one of the hardest work that I have to do is allowing what people already know to be true. Like, it takes multiple tries. I know that they want to shame you out of that,
Mm-hmm.
but it is true. You are in fact correct, and you might have that experience. And so just kind of being, again, it's a thread, right? Because being without fear allows you to be empowered, but your power can also create fear in other people. So I try not to push too hard, but yes, the work is allowing people to validating people's experiences, and like that, and knowing that experience is just part of the story.
Yes.
It's not a marker of like who you are or what you'll be able to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And being honest about what the process looks like and takes, and the fact that it is messy and painful, and so none of that can be packaged up in a way that's always satisfactory.
Yes. I love that.
And I think that, obviously confidentiality is, it does play a part, and it can be challenging for people in our community to talk about it. And when I say community, I mean Lewiston.
Yes.
We are a diverse community, but people of all walks of life struggle with substance use disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that as far as relapse goes, from my own personal experience, it took multiple tries.
Yes.
But at the heart of it, what I'd want to tell a young person, and I am not a licensed alcohol and drug counselor,
Yes.
I'm just a woman in long-term recovery.
Yeah.
The only thing I would tell them, if we were speaking in a structured environment, whatever that might look like in the future, resources that we provide is, it took what it took until I was ready to say I want to get healthy for myself.
Mm-hmm.
In spite of everything else that I might have heard, which was, people being scared for me, people being embarrassed for me, or whatever that looks like. At the end of the day, we do a great job of beating ourselves up all on our own.
Mm-hmm.
So I would remind them to be gentle with themselves, that with a relapse, you don't lose any of the learning that you've gained.
Mm-hmm.
You're still growing.
Yes.
And the only thing, that I fear the most is that they might be shamed into saying, well, I'm just not even going to bother to try again because I relapsed. And so I think providing them with, some testimonials or whatever that might look like, whatever is, allowable. I don't know if that's the word, but it's a tough thing to talk about. But just reminding them that, they are worthy of, sobriety and recovery, and that we're not perfect.
I love that. Thank you. So, if somebody who worked in the school system wanted to help a student, what kind of community or like what space should they build for those students? Like they're a freshman teacher coming into the system, and their goal is to help youth who are struggling with substance use or mental health. How do you think they could go about that?
For me, I would say primarily get educated, right? Like there's a lot of information out there. We interact with the information, but we don't critically think about it. We don't assess our own values and our own opinions and check ourselves for our own beliefs that are incorrect around these topics, and even recognize our own trauma, because that has something to do, that will impact our ability to help others or perceive what's happening. And so I would say primarily start with getting educated around how uncomfortable the topic is, how broad it is, and what every person is, you'll be serving in our community, diverse community. So get educated in all the ways that are relevant to the, students that you're serving. And I would say branch out and have conversations with other adults in that space about how to engage when we are either worried or we feel that this is a thing we want to raise to the surface. We obviously have a great referral system as well through the counseling our system and such. But if you just wanted as an educator to learn how to identify the signs or create protective factors or support in any way, I would say start with getting educated around what substance abuse disorder is, and it's a lot of times a re-education of what we thought.
I agree. And that piece is huge, to take advantage of the resources that we do have for educators to learn about that. And I think it can continue to be integrated within social emotional practices, whatever that might look like for a teacher. Because yes, we can make referrals and we can do things like that, but we are, as a teacher, you are doing life with these students. You're with them. I'm with my students quite a bit. So, I'm kind of on the front lines of being an observer. And sometimes if I see something and I thought, wow, the student has been absent for 2 weeks straight or whatever's going on. And I think it's having maybe just that little bit of an elevated consciousness. I don't mean to be like hyper vigilant, but just knowing that I have a really great, I'm privileged to be in the position that I am, so that I do pay attention to some of the subtle signs that I see. Of course, my own personal experience does give me, I'm grateful to have that background and that experience, but I think that, sometimes it's just having that bit of compassion and being able to be that liaison, that bridge from a student to, if they do need something, or even just being able to help them to open up that conversation, because it can be a scary place for a student to be able to say, hey, geez, I'm struggling with this, Miss Gio. Well, I mean, they're still young developing minds, so they may not be ready to just launch into that type of conversation. So
Thank you. You basically touched upon my next question. I was gonna ask, how does you, like, being in recovery and like your experiences changed like how like you approach teaching or working with students? How do you think it'd be different if you didn't have the experiences you had?
I mean, mental health.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think, to put it plainly, My experiences give me an enhanced understanding of what lack of mental health supports and a lack of checking in on whether that's there or supporting that can create in a young person's life. As a young person myself, I had just mental health challenges that were not properly accounted for or supported, and so therefore a lot of my sense of being lost, my sense of confusion, my sense of came from that. And I think so now, as a person who is open about my own recovery and is open about the experiences that I've had, I'm aware of the fact that it requires a lot of compassion, and it requires a lot of our own work. And in that, I mean, I don't, not every kid who is maybe having an issue or wants to talk is the appropriate person, or I am the appropriate person for that. And doing my own work I mean, the humility around how much work you have to do when you have been doing the work in recovery, because you're working with these vulnerable young people, is surprising. I just thought you do the best that you can, and that's just, but so much triggers can so many triggers can be revealed, and at least for me, I have to be careful about my motivations. I have to be careful about my ideas around my own influence and impact. And really, I try to assess every situation as like, is this about me or is this about them? Because I understand that when it comes to mental health, when it comes to substance use disorder, when it comes to being a person with a history of that, like a lot of that I can be responding from the past in the present. And so I need to check what I'm speaking to and why I am choosing that conversation. If I'm the appropriate person to have in that room that day, all of those things I have to account for so that I'm supporting the mental health of our students when I engage in any of these areas.
Thank you.
Yes, for me, it comes back to wanting to be, human being centered and student first. And definitely I have much more of a trauma-informed lens than I probably ever would have had, because I don't think we talked about that back in the 80s and the 90s necessarily, although it was there. So I'm thankful that that's a dialogue that is becoming more and more prevalent, not just in Maine, but in our, in the United States that's a good thing. And I think being able to ask myself some of the questions, and a lot of this, I'll be honest with you, comes from the work I've done as a woman in long-term recovery, but also as a person that worked in an applied behavior analysis program, and all of those things, learning to put things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like what does this child think, feel, need, or want? How can I best provide them emotional first aid right now? Because sometimes as an adult, I might have a day where I can't even regulate myself. I'm dysregulated. And there is nothing more challenging than having to present professionally, acutely, articulately, when your insides are on fire or dysregulated. But we do it, right? You might have something going on and you still have to go to work that day, but somebody might not have any idea what you're going through. And so, our students, some days it's very obvious, if the hoodie's drawn or their head is down on the desk, it's pretty obvious that there might be something going on. Sometimes it's not so obvious. So I go back to those questions like, where is looking at the behavior, looking at body language, looking at this or that. And I don't think I would have had that if it weren't for my background, both in my personal life as a woman in long-term recovery, and then the work that I'm grateful for the experiences I've had working with students in a lot of different environments and settings and situations.
Well, thank you guys so much for the work that you do and how amazing you guys are. So I also want to thank you for just being open about your recovery journey. What made you want to be open? Because there's a lot of people who have that fear of like, what is everybody gonna think, or like that stigma factor. I kind of asked this prior, but like it's more so like what like motivated you to, because like also like as a teacher or like working with students, like a parent might have that like concern, or like a student might, but like you guys are very inspiring, especially working in the school system. If like a lot of the students that I graduated with had someone like you in like their classes, it would have definitely helped them a lot. So yeah.
Yeah. For me, I think it was a no-brainer as soon as I would feel safe that I would talk about my experience because I mean, I'm in that sense, I'm counterculture from the culture that I come from. Talking about things openly is not a practice for me, but then I'm also from another world and where we do post everything and we talk about everything and we share on social media. And so, like, in me live these two, pieces where I'm really protective of my truth but I've also learned how to own who I am to my benefit. And so I know, like I said, where it's safe for me to be, who I am. But in terms of like speaking openly, a lot of times I find it that like, yeah, it's a function, again, sometimes experience perspective is a function of experience. I've learned that, by being honest, I am creating trust by being open, even with parents, right, who are like, I don't want my kid to have any substance abuse issues. I'm really like scared about this. This is going on in my community. This is going on in my household. Like, how do I protect my kid? The last thing they want to hear maybe is like, oh, me too, But it does, I think, when I do say to a parent, like, I've been there, I've done that, I've overcome that, it does introduce hope. And I think that whether you like my story, whether you're comfortable with it or not, gives us something else to focus on. Yeah. And so, yes, it is both the work of being brave and like, and harnessing our fears. And just because I can be open about my recovery doesn't mean I'm brave about every part of my life. There are things that I still will always struggle with. There are aspects of that are so like nobody cares about this thing. And I'm like, I can never say this thing. So like, there is no one way of being, and being one way doesn't mean you're that way all in every way. But yeah, for me it comes from knowing what has been most useful for me, which is telling my truth and owning it, and then again and using it to create hope.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for me, I think it's a balance of wanting to be a positive role model, also being very careful to be appropriate about how much I share, because I need to be mindful of that. It's appropriate. If it's not appropriate for me to share certain things, I don't. I share at a very base level, but what I say is that, there's courage in owning your truth, whether it's about something to do with substance use disorder or any of the challenges that we face as individuals and as human beings. So for me, it's about being very careful about what I choose to share, but sharing a message of hope. Trying to just remind young people that you can overcome anything, because it isn't just about substance use disorder or mental health. It could be other things too. So providing a good example. And then the other thing too is whatever issues we're talking about with young people, because there are many growing up, is that anything to do with shame dies in the light. So I think that's one of the reasons that I want to be able to at least be there for them to talk about, even if I'm, going to be very, very mindful of what I share.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. And I really want to thank you for being so open and being so amazing with the work that you guys do. You guys are very inspiring, and the work that you're putting into like the community and what you guys are doing for our youth, our future, is very inspiring. So I really want to thank you guys for coming on. To lighten up the mood just a little, I'm gonna do a last icebreaker just to finish us out. Do you guys know the game Two Truths and a Lie?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. So you're going to give us two truths and a lie, and then we're all going to guess which one's the lie, and then next person goes. I'll start off just to, save everybody time. Okay. I should have thought of this before. Wow. One, I've been in Lewiston my whole life. I've been in 3 car crashes, and I've been to Let me think about this one. What was my first one?
You've been enlisted your whole life.
Oh. Okay, I've been enlisted my whole life. I've been in 3 car crashes, and I'm the oldest of 7 siblings.
Can I answer as your friend? Like I already know.
You're excluded then.
My guess is that. My guess would be that you're the oldest of 7.
That's a lie?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. I hope the lie is that you've been in 3 car crashes.
The lie is I'm the oldest of 7. I'm the oldest of 8.
Wow.
Just like you have to add a little truth. No, I have. So the first time someone hit me from the side, the second time someone hit me from the back,
Oh no.
and the third time I was singing the High School Musical and I missed a turn and I hit a tree. Yeah, you probably don't want to drive with me. I'm sorry, AnNisa.
We just drove together. It's gonna be a long drive back. An awkward one.
2 of them weren't my fault.
She did see me as she was driving, like hold on to the. She's like, I'm sorry. I'll go next. I love driving. That I am one of 8, and that I was born in Thailand.
Oh, I know. Earlier you said you were born in Russia.
Haha, ding, 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 ding. I made mine easy so I could get out of this.
You're a great listener.
Oh boy. Okay. So I am bilingual. I play the saxophone, and one of my legs is longer than the other.
That one leg is longer than the other. That's the lie.
Yeah.
I'll give other people.
Yes, it is. That's the lie. I am bilingual, and I play the saxophone.
I believe that because I think one of my legs was longer than the other.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest.
No, I worked in medical equipment before, and so yes, if you obviously as you age, your body changes, but also if you've had surgery, if you've had a hip replacement, if you've had things like that, knee replacement, that can create a difference. Yeah.
Sometimes I walk slanted, so I'm like, oh.
So like somewhere. Okay, so first one is I was born in Egypt. Second, I had a cat for just 1 week. And third is let's see. I minored in criminology.
I can't talk.
Yeah.
Ooh, that you had a cat for a week.
Oh, unfortunately, I had to have it for a week because my dad was allergic and we had to bring it back. Yeah, I know, baby. But once she got used to us, we had to get rid of her.
Oh no, rehome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm gonna you can't answer.
Any guess?
I guess that you were born in Egypt?
Yes, I've lived in Egypt, but I was not born there. Born in the States.
Okay. Well, if any of our guests want to reach out to you, do you have any way?
Yes. So, I mean, it's just pretty generic. I think if they reach out to you,
Yes.
I'm more than happy if you provide my email, and yeah, I would love to connect with people.
Beautiful.
I think the same would be
Yes.
appropriate. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. No, usually we do like the Instagram and stuff, but I'm like,
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
think y'all got it, so it's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, Amran and I talk a lot about how I'm like the social media thing. I'm super behind.
Same. My students kind of just like, Miss G.
I know. I'm like,
but
yes.
Yes.
There was a time before where you like had a real picture and you like put it in an album and then like and you went there and you looked through it and contemplated and reflected and
Went to
and then-
Walgreens to like print it out.
Yes.
yes.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
I'm trying to get into scrapbooking now. That's one of the
My
hobbies
sister's
I pick
big
up. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, thank you guys again for coming on. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
It's been a privilege to be here, and
Mhm.
thank you all.
Thank you.
It's been great.
Well, thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys have a good afternoon, morning, evening, whatever time you're listening to this podcast. And if you are driving, I hope you drive safe.